Kia ora team, welcome to the new year, welcome to 2024, welcome to DayZ 1.23, welcome to Chernarus, welcome to Chernogorsk, and welcome to the White Cloud server. Yes, this is my server, this is a server that I am running for my viewers and subscribers who watch all of this nonsense that I perform on YouTube. So, hi, hello, and welcome to everything and all that you are doing. Thank you very, very much for being here. So, why are we here? What are we here for? And what are we doing? Well, this is my server, and this is a modded server. I have taken it in the direction that I think DayZ probably suggests that it should be going, or should have gone, based on the lore and based on some of the things that have been discussed and some of the things that are in the introduction to the game and so on and so forth. However, there are some limitations, so let's cover the limitations first. Firstly, there is a memory budget. The memory budget for the PS4 and the PS5 means that there is a limitation to the amount of mods that I can bring onto my server and still successfully run my PlayStation 5. Now, the PlayStation 5 memory budget is bigger than the PlayStation 4 memory budget. This game has been tested by me and I am running PS5, so I can't guarantee that a PS4 will have a stable game depending on the amount of players that are engaged at the time, which changes the allocation of the memory budget. Some of these things you may know, some of these things you may not know. Such is the life of modding. So while there are an awful lot of mods out there that I would dearly, dearly love to be able to be involved with and love to put into the game, I have had to make some allowance for the fact that I can't put in everything that I really, really wanted. So I've focused on the predominant part of the game which suggests that the game should be harder the further inland you go, and there should be more loot the further inland you go. So that's the kind of idea that I've taken to the modding, and I've put a few things in, and I've put some interesting things in that have come through and stuff that I found that I can add to it without damaging the memory budget too much. But for example, while I might want to make Chernogorsk a fantastic new post-apocalyptic town, the memory budget is massive and it doesn't allow me to do so. Or at least I could do that, but I couldn't do anything else. So I've taken a more balanced approach to that. The second thing is I can't change the AI. There are things in the game that I simply cannot amend. So I cannot amend how the infected behave. I cannot amend some of the other ways that the game behaves. That is simply the way that it is. Although I can change some things, and some things I have changed. I have modified a lot of the places along the coast. Chernogorsk is not one of them, and you would be able to see it if not for the weather, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But by and large, Chernogorsk is exactly how it comes off the map, and as you can see over here, this is the port where most people spawn in with the container yards and everything else. You have the large industrial complexes over here, and then you have down in the distance in the fog, you have the town itself with the town hall and the church and the everything else. The plane crashed into the building and whatnot and so on and so forth. But this is Chernogorsk. There are a lot of other places along the coast that will be slightly different, and during this part of this showcase I will be going through some of those hopefully and showing you what things have changed, and hopefully picking up on some of the things, and that will be part of this edition that I'm calling it. So there you are. So there will be some changes, but Chernogorsk is not one of them. The other thing that probably need to be aware of is I have changed the way that the loot spawns. So if you listen to the way that the game talks about loot, you obviously have the loot tier system, which indicates that the coast is the lowest tier of loot, which is the basic things that you need to survive, and the further inland you go towards the military, up at Tizzy, you end up getting better loot, and that's all very well and good. However, there are some items of loot that are absolutely pointless, like rubber slugs. So rubber slugs, for example, do not feature on my map. You may find one or two, but by and large, I have gotten rid of a lot of them. However, there are other things that do feature a lot on the map, like hoodies. Hoodies are very useful, so you will probably find a lot of hoodies. And I have balanced some of the other things like weapons. So there's some weapons which are not particularly great, and there's some weapons that are very good. And I've tried to balance out the numbers, taking that approach in mind. However, I am also conscious that I didn't want to make it a case of everybody rushes to Tizzy and grabs all of the best gear at Tizzy, which I have not liked, and I don't like that mechanic. So I have tried to scatter some of the better loot amongst the tier 3 and tier 4 areas. There is more of it, but with it being more spread out, it might seem more rare. And I wanted to get away from the fact that everyone just runs up the train track to Tizzy and hops into Tizzy and grabs a few things, etc., etc. Not on my list of favourite priorities of things to do and things the way that happen. Well, welcome back. There's just been a server refresh, so we can now see some of Chernogorsk there in the distance, and Prigorodki or whatever it is up on the hills, etc., etc., etc. So things have cleared up a little bit, and there we go. Pop all the assets back in, and here we are. So infected-wise, there are more infected in the military bases, and obviously that's because there is better loot at the military bases, and I have stacked military bases with different kinds of loot that I would expect to see at military bases. So you may find things in the military bases that you're not used to finding on official. There are also more infected on the towns further inland than there are down by the coast. I've actually taken out infected by the coast. There are still infected here, don't get me wrong. There are infected running around, and you will have seen some running around down there. But there are less infected at the coast because what's the point? There's not an awful lot going on at the coast. Most people don't hang around the coast. There's not an awful lot of loot here. If you want the best gear, you need to go inland to get it. I have stacked the infected inland, but not at the coast. On the infected, there's not a lot I can do to amend the infected so much, but I have done a couple of things. One of those things I'm not going to tell you about, and it'll be a little bit of a surprise, and we might run into it in this edition. You might run into it if you're playing on the server. You might run into it before I run into it. But there are also mummies on the server. Oh! Very nice sound effect, slightly distant. Yes, they are the most challenging infected you can get from the vanilla game, and they are the easiest to spawn in without wrecking the game mechanic and wrecking the other infected mechanics too much. So you will find mummies on the server, and that is a challenge. They are not easy to kill. They do come with some interesting loot budgets, but they are definitely not easy to kill. They are quite tricky to kill. If you've seen my episode, I think it took 12 shots with the 308 to shoot one. Yeah, they're pretty robust, so you probably want to be careful with the mummies, but they are there as a challenge, and they are there to make you think about exactly how you play the game. The server is intended for intermediate to advanced players, and as a result, I want you to really think about what you're doing. I don't want you to just run around and think you can start shooting, because if a mummy turns up, he's going to really drain your ammo quite a lot. So your ammo usage may be something that comes slightly more important to you with more infected and with more mummies kicking around, and in some places there may be a lot more than one. So you probably need to be aware of that. I've also taken the opportunity to change some of the dynamic events, and I've increased the spawn rates of some of the dynamic events, because I always felt unofficial that it was ultra rare to run across a dynamic event. And I know why, because an awful lot of very special gear spawns at dynamic events. And I'm talking about things like the train crashes and the military convoys and things, not so much the heli crashes. But I have increased the number of the dynamic events because I really do feel like it is something that a lot of people should experience. And the problem with the dynamic events as it was it was quite tricky for people to experience them. So I've increased those numbers. I haven't increased anything else, but hopefully that means you'll run across slightly more of them. I've changed the dynamic event loot a little bit more, so the dynamic event loot will be slightly different. There are some things that in the vanilla game are exclusive to dynamic events. I have taken a lot of that out. Again, it's one of those RNG things where you run it wrong, you find a dynamic event, and you get a really, really good weapon like a DMR, and the rest of us don't enjoy the benefit of being able to grab a DMR, because no matter how many times we try, RNG is just against it, and the RNG is a bit of a pain in an awful lot of games, and I don't particularly like it in DayZ, so I've changed the way some of the loot spawns around some of those things. I have changed some of the infected spawn locations. Not a lot of them, but some. And I don't think I'll tell you too much more than that right now, because I think a lot of it will be quite interesting if you decide that you're going to go to place A and figure that there won't be an awful lot of infected there, and you turn up and suddenly there are an awful lot of infected there, and they might not be the kinds of infected you are expecting. So I have tried to change some of the spawn locations, but not too many, because changing too many spawn locations and introducing too many infected can have a bearing on the memory budget, as we have discussed at the outset. In terms of starting then, what I have tried to do is increase what you will start with in vanilla. So when you start out as a fresh spawn, you will start out with the same health and water and food starting status, but you will start with more in your inventory. You will start with a head torch, you will start with a battery, you will start with some additional food, you will start with a water container, and you will start with, but it will be empty, and you will start with a couple of cans of soda to get you started. And part of that is because I think, as I've said before on a number of other occasions, I really do not like the mad scramble in the first hour. Especially for an intermediate advanced player, it's just a nuisance. You know it's going to happen, and you log on and you have to do it, and it's just a nuisance. So I've tried to avoid that feeling of scrambling. So you start out with what I believe to be a comfortable starting position for an intermediate player, and then you can start to get into exploring, for example, all of those containers, if that's something that you really want to spend your time doing, or heading down into the town, heading over, grabbing some water, some of these apartment blocks and seeing what you can pick up, or heading up into the tower blocks or something else. So gives you some additional breathing space and some time to think and some time to plan and some time to do some additional things. That's it, really. I haven't really changed too much else, and there's limits to what I can change. So I haven't changed vehicle spawning, for example. I know a lot of servers start with vehicles, you know, fully kitted, ready to go, lots of petrol, everything there. I haven't done that. I do think it is a bit of a challenge to get a vehicle, and I think it should be. I think if you find getting vehicles quite easy, you treat vehicles as disposable, and they're not really disposable. And I don't want people running around with vehicles driving left, right and center, doing this and doing that without having to make an effort. It is an effort to get vehicles, and it should be an effort to get vehicles, so I'm happy to leave it exactly as it is. I haven't done too much with changing anything with day and night. I've changed the day and night cycles slightly, and I've opted for the bright night setting instead of the dark night setting, because the dark night is actually very, very dark. In terms of the weather, you will have seen some dynamic weather. These are the weather things that are already available actually on the base game. It's just something you don't see on official servers, and it took a little bit of time for me to figure it all out and get it all working. But we actually do have fog effects in the base game, and I have switched those on. And we have storms, and we have rain, and we have sun, and we have everything else, and I'm happy to work through those. And those are things that come and go dynamically, and it will change your gameplay, because sometimes the fog comes in pretty thick and you wouldn't even see this tank in front of me, and that's going to change how you play PvE and PvP, because before you know it, you've stumbled across a mummy, and then you're in a whole lot of pain. I've been knocked out so many times on this map. It is quite hilarious. So there you go. That's it. That's the introduction to the map. That's the introduction to the White Cloud server. And these are the things that you need to know, and some of the rules that there are. There is really only one major rule that I have in place that I would like you to be aware of, and that is that if you do come onto this server, you are not permitted to build a base in either a military area or within the confines of a castle. That includes building a base around the outside of a military area or around the outside of a castle, restricting people from accessing it. And that is because castles and military areas spawn particular groups and types of loot, and I am not a fan of people who just rock up to a military base, build a wall around the outside of it, and go, here you go, this is my military base and all the loot in here is mine. No, no, and no. You can go and build a base wherever you like. You can build it in a town, you can build it in a city, you can build it in a warehouse, you can build it in the wilderness, but you cannot build it in a castle, and you cannot build it in military. The server logs these activities, and the admin staff can have a look at the logs and determine who has been building, where they have been building, and permanently ban those people. There will be no warning. You have been warned now, and there is a warning which flashes up on the server in the messages. You are not permitted to build within castles, and you are not permitted to build within military. That is the way that it is. So, without further ado, we're going to get into this. This is going to be the White Cloud server. This is going to be edition 1, I think, is what I'm going to call it. And I will provide details at the end of this first video as to how you can apply to gain access to the server. But for now, every server needs a story. So what is the story for this server? Well, it's been 20 years since the pandemic that caused the rise of the infected. Driven by madness and an aggressive tendency, these people are not quite alive and not quite dead, but will attack any other person on sight. You are a lone survivor who are immune to these things. Like so many people in the world, there are isolated areas where the wealthy have secluded themselves behind high walls and subject anyone trying to enter to rigorous barrages of medical tests, and those who fail are summarily dealt with, and not necessarily in the nicest of ways. Consequently, around the globe, there are caravans of refugees who are transiting from one area to another, trying to make their way out of infected, horde-infested areas, and trying to gain access or refugee status within some of the more affluent areas around the world. You find yourself separated from your refugee caravan and washed up on the shores of the Republic of Chernobyl. You have to try and survive. You have to try and make the best of the situation that you find yourself in. The coastal towns in this area have been constantly barraged and pummeled from the navy far out at sea. They are prone to gas attacks, as you can see. But there are still infected here. As refugee caravans occasionally move through the area, infections spread, people splinter off, become infected, wander through the towns and wander through the cities and wander through the wilderness and countrysides. You find yourself here trying to scratch a living, but what kind of a living will it be? Will you be a humanitarian person trying to aid other survivors that you find along the way? Will you be a scavenger? Will you kill everyone you meet? Will you set up a base and establish a foundation in the area where you can prey on anyone coming your way? Or will you try and help those who are less fortunate and not hinder? These are the decisions that you can make, and this is the way that you can play the game on this server. So for now, what are you going to do? What will you be? Will you be a humanitarian? Or will you be a human consumer? Who can say? Right, so Cura, here we are. Where are we? We are just outside Baloa. Is where we are, I do believe. That is the marsh, and that is Kamishovu, I think, down there. So this is not where I wanted to start out. I do want to start it down at the bottom past Kamenka. I don't want to go all the way down to the roadblock. It's a roadblock, and there's a military at the end, and there's a Hummer spawn, and there's some military clothes and things, and there's a few military infected, but it's not exactly new and it's not exactly surprising. But what I want to do is I want to go down there, and then I want to come all the way up the coast, and we'll have a look at the coast, and we'll even go and have a look at the islands, and we'll do the whole of the coastline in the first few episodes, so that you guys get a feel for what the coast looks like before we start going inland and look at the more adventurous places that are inland. But we have just spawned in. What have we spawned in with? Well, here's what we spawn in with. We spawn in with one empty plastic bottle, one bandage, one nightlight glow stick, one battery, which we attach to our head torch, one sharp hunting knife, 2 pears, and 1 can of Nauticola. We have a shirt in pristine condition. We have some cargo pants in pristine condition. We obviously have the head torch, and we have some sneakers or athletic shoes in pristine condition. So that's what we spawned in with, and that's what you spawn in with here. And if you join me on this server, that's what you will be spawning in with. I can't guarantee you will spawn at Baloa, but there you go. Anyway, that's it for this one and this introduction. So I'm not going to be taking it any further here with you guys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to head down the coast, pick up some of the necessities to keep me alive until I get down to the bottom at Kamenka. And I'm going to start the next episode from Kamenka, and I'm going to slowly work my way all the way up the coast from the bottom to the very, very top, and checking out the islands as we go, and checking out any of the changes there have been, and then we shall take it from there. So that's all for now. I hope you enjoy the first edition of the White Cloud server. I hope you decide that it's somewhere that you want to come and play and have fun, because it really is better fun with more people running around and doing all of the things that people do, base building and squirreling about and shooting at each other and hiding and lurking and setting traps and doing all of this and that and everything else. So please drop a like, do subscribe to the channel. We are doing great with our subscribers, and the channel views are just absolutely fantastic over the last few weeks, which is probably because we're all on holiday. Some of us have to go back to work tomorrow, boo, but there you go. And I shall see you all again real soon. Ta-ta for now. PlayStation